go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
I guess I was wondering, well, I'm kind of new to all your stuff, but not
Great.
new to magic.
How are you enjoying? How are you enjoying
What?
it? How are you enjoying it so far?
I'm looking around, peeking.
Okay.
My general question would be, just in general, what do you think of Wu Wei in terms of practice?
Oh, wait. Now there's like, what is this from Star Wars? No, there is a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, because my practice is kind of a practice without practice. It has every practice in it. It self-arises and everything. So I was just wondering what you would think in terms of, practice in relation to Wu Wei.
This is a great. This is like a core question. I'm so happy you asked this. This is a controversial topic, right? And I thought, this has been something that I've had to struggle with for a long time. So just for people who may not understand Wu Wei, which is referred to as different things in other traditions, particularly the Eastern traditions, Veda Vedanta, or the Tao, or kind of doing easy, just going with the natural flow of reality, which is or a practiceless practice in a way, the practice of no practice, or Zen, right? Similar, or Vipassana in a way, Vayupasana. So the general idea there is that nature is, the existence is already happening. Like it's just everything is already happening. You don't need to guide it. And so when we look at stories of great achieved meditation masters and mystical masters and things like that, usually they get to this place of Wu Wei where it's just like they're one with the Tao or whatever. It's like they're just they're striving to not exercise will on a reality at all, and there tends to be a recognition that magical practices or spiritual practices get in the way. Now, this is a point of a lot of confusion for beginning students, or maybe intermediate students. Intermediate students begin to get attracted to this concept. It particularly becomes attractive to people when they get a little burnt out on, there's so much to learn, there's so much to look at, there's so many different practices, they're contradictory. After, many years of going through different practice systems, it can get a little, exhausting. There's just too much stuff. So this is a really important point, though, because when you're beginning, I don't want to say need, but you kind of need a practice, right? And so the perspective of Wu Wei, I think, is best understood as the practice of somebody who has already gone through the practices and gets to an effortless place. It's not a starting point of just doing nothing. You can't just do nothing and you're enlightened, right? So I think a good way of looking at it would be learning to ride a bike, right? This is kind of a cheesy metaphor, but you can consider learning to ride a bike. When you first start learning to ride a bike, you have first you have a tricycle, right? Then you have a bike with stabilizer wheels. And then you graduate to riding just a bike with two wheels. And, that can be that in itself, going through those three stages, there's a lot to learn, assuming you start learning really young. But, and then eventually through trial and error, you get to a place where riding a bike is effortless, right? The proverbial, once you learn it, you never have to think about it again, right? So in a sense, if you know how to ride a bike, then riding a bike, it becomes unconscious processing. It's your unconscious completely takes over the practice of riding a bike, and it becomes like your heart beating, and you do it without thinking about it, right? And so this is the state referred to by when people are talking about Wu Wei, but also like if you look at martial arts, where it just becomes effortless, it appears effortless, right? And so usually also another way to look at this is when people start learning things, first they try to understand the thing and it's totally overwhelming. And they may have a moment of beginner's luck where they just try something. And then they'll go through a long period of learning heuristics or patterns, which are they're following recipes to do something that somebody who is more advanced can do effortlessly. So there's a long period of doing recipes and heuristics, and then ultimately, if they keep advancing, they get to a point of mastery, which is they drop all the heuristics, they just know it, it's part of muscle memory, and they just do it, and they don't need to refer. And it's the same with magic, or meditation, right? Meditation is the same. Let's just take meditation. Like somebody goes in, they start reading, they start learning the concepts, they start getting their head around this whole world. Then they start learning meditation techniques and practices, and that may go on for decades, of following techniques. And then eventually there may be a point where it becomes effortless. Same with magic, right? Where we see with magic where people learn first the theory, they read the books, then they start learning rituals and practices and sequences and patterns, recipes, and following them and doing them, or learning by modeling other. This is another good one for learning any skill. Learning by modeling people who are already doing it and just trying to model what they're doing. And then finally, there comes a point where, particularly with magic, where it just becomes, it becomes like Wu Wei. It's like there's not external props. Now that said, I go back and forth between these perspectives, and I don't think that one is right. I think that even when after getting to a point of, like it's an empty-handed, it's effortless, it's Wu Wei, there are still times when I still go back to structure, and sometimes structure is really important in specific practices, particularly because once you're in the Wu Wei state, it's just easy to get too lazy. And Peter Carroll said something insightful about this in the 90s in Cyber Magic, I think, where he says, he refers to it as dropping the wand. He basically says, like, if you get to a point where you feel like your magic happens effortlessly just by the dint of you existing because you're enlightened or something like that, and you find yourself not doing actual rituals, then you've dropped the wand in his perspective, and it's time to go back to more structured practice. But I think generally the best way to look at this is just look at it as the curve of learning anything, where you start from a not understanding, then you start going through heuristics and patterns, and ultimately, and that's this period of directed practice. And it takes a lot, this is the 10,000 hours or whatever, the directed practice. And then finally, once these heuristics and patterns are so well practiced that they become second nature, then it's the Wu Wei. It's just effortless. It's like playing piano without having to think about it, riding a bike without having to think about it, meditating without having to think about it, and so on and so forth. Is that helpful?
Well, I was also kind of thinking about it as sort of not necessarily a lack of practice, but an intuitive arising of constant practice, and not necessarily dropping a wand, but to which you begin to recognize everything as a part of your wand, so that every situation becomes, in a sense, a ritual. And it does take a discipline to see that. It's not just effortless, but that you come to a point where intuition can do more complex things in an effortless manner.
I completely agree with all of that, and that's well put. And the distinction that I'm pointing out, because this is a very important distinction for everybody, is that we have to just make a distinction. What you're describing is advanced stage practice, right? You're describing advanced stages.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the confusion happens when people confuse the advanced state practice, where somebody says it's Wu Wei, it's effortless, I'm doing nothing, with the pre state of I'm not doing anything. Oh, I don't have to do anything to get enlightened. And there's a big confusion that has arisen out of this. I mean, you can look at people's Instagrams and things like that. It's just like, oh, well, just be here now and let go, and then you're enlightened. It's like, well, no, those phrases come out of states of people who are already advanced.
And it can help with development at certain periods.
What was that?
Sorry, I don't know when you're pausing. I think that the practice itself can be developmental, not necessarily pinned upon, but just the certain call.
I'm not sure I understand.
Just when you put yourself in a certain position of Wu Wei, it's like putting yourself in a certain state. It might not be so advanced, but it does allow you to notice things from a different way. Not necessarily dependable without another practice, but an opening.
Oh, totally. Right. And I think that, but you probably wouldn't have been able to. So there's this classic phrase, right? Like the map is not the territory. Well, okay, no shit, right? But you probably couldn't get to where the map, once you've got to the place that the map is pointing you to, you're not going to be able to get there without the map, right? The map will get you to the territory. So what I mean by that is, if you practice for a long period of, it's like if you're good at anything, then let's say magic, right? Like once you go through the practice, I mean, what you're describing, or you know states of consciousness intuitively that previously you needed rituals to get you into, right? But now they're anchored because you're familiar with those, and so you can just enter them at will, right? But you probably wouldn't have been able to find your way there, or at least not find your way there in a structured and effective manner without prior guide, right? Hello? Hello? Did we lose you? Okay, I can't hear you. Hopefully that answers your question. It's an extremely good question and a very important point to make.